I never thought I'd find myself in this position, sitting alone, staring out the window, trying to make sense of the whirlwind my life has become. It all started with something so small, so innocent, that I didn't even see the storm coming. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you my marriage wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I had accepted the quiet distance between my husband and me, the routine days, the polite conversations, and the absence of passion. It became the background noise of my life, until he brought his son to live with us. He was polite, respectful, and carried himself with a quiet kind of strength. At first, I saw him only as my stepson, a young man trying to adjust to a new home after years of being apart from his father. I did my best to make him feel welcome, to cook meals he liked, to ask him about his day. It felt natural, easy. We never crossed any lines. But there were moments, quick glances, small smiles, shared silences, that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. I brushed them off. I reminded myself of who I was, his stepmother. A woman much older than him. A married woman. But feelings have a strange way of growing in the cracks we try to ignore. And in a house full of silence and distance, his presence became something I started looking forward to. He noticed things, like when I was tired, when I was upset, when I was quietly crying in the kitchen with my back turned. And one night, when the weight of everything had finally caught up with me, I broke down. I was sitting on the couch, trying to hide my tears, thinking of all the years I had given to a man who no longer saw me. I didn't even hear him come into the room. He didn't say a word. He just sat beside me, close but not too close, and reached out gently, just a touch on my shoulder. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't wrong. But it was the first time in so long that someone touched me with care, with kindness, without judgment. That simple gesture broke something open in me. I wish I could say that's where it ended, that I wiped my tears, thanked him, and we moved on. But something shifted in that moment, and I didn't know how to stop it. He looked at me not like a child, but like someone who saw the woman behind all the pain. I was scared of what I was feeling, ashamed even, but also confused, because for the first time in years, I felt seen. And that's where everything began to unravel. I know how this sounds. I know the judgment that might come. But I promise you, this is not the story you think it is. There's more to it, so much more. What happened next changed everything. And once it started, there was no going back. Before I tell you what happened after that night, I need to take you back a little, to when I first met my husband. He was older, well-established, and came with the kind of calm that made me feel safe. I was in my early 30s then, still finding my place in the world, still healing from a heartbreak that had left me questioning my worth. He was everything I thought I needed, steady, reliable, mature. We married within a year, and for a while, I believed I had made the right choice. But the truth is, we skipped past the part where we actually got to know each other. Our conversations were mostly about work, bills, and plans that never really included dreams. The emotional connection faded faster than I expected. I tried to fill the space with hobbies, friends, and long walks alone. I didn't complain. I kept telling myself that real love doesn't always look like the movies. I convinced myself that peace was enough, even when it felt like loneliness. When he told me his son would be moving in, I didn't think much of it. They hadn't been close for years. His son had been raised by his mother in another city, and their relationship was strained at best. I imagined it would be temporary, a few months at most. I agreed because it seemed like the right thing to do, not realizing how much his presence would stir something in this quiet, cold house. He was different from his father. More thoughtful. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He noticed the little things, like when I changed my hair or wore a new perfume. Not in a flirtatious way, but in a way that made me feel seen, even when I didn't want to be. We started talking more, about life, about disappointments, about feeling like you're stuck in a life that looks good on the outside but feels empty on the inside. There was a night when I made dinner for just the two of us. My husband was working late again. We talked for hours without even realizing how much time had passed. It wasn't romantic, not intentionally, but there was a closeness forming that scared me. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became that something was changing. That gentle touch on the couch wasn't just a comfort, it was a turning point. Not because of what he did, but because of how it made me feel. And once I allowed myself to feel it, I couldn't pretend anymore. I started questioning everything, my marriage, my choices, and most of all, my own heart. But nothing could prepare me for what would happen next. After that night, something shifted in the way I looked at him, and in the way he looked at me. We never spoke about what happened on the couch. It was just a moment, just a touch, but it left an echo between us. The next day, we both acted like nothing had changed. I made breakfast like I always did. He sat at the table, scrolled on his phone, and thanked me like usual. But I could feel the difference. It was in the silence. In the way we avoided eye contact for just a second too long. My husband didn't notice. He never did. His world was made up of meetings, phone calls, and half-hearted nods when I tried to talk about my day. He had no idea what was quietly building in his own home. If I'm honest, I don't think he wanted to know. He had grown so distant that I began to feel like a tenant more than a wife. And when his son arrived, that distance only grew. It was as if my husband had stepped further back while someone else stepped in, slowly, carefully. I started spending more time out of the house, just to clear my head. I would take long walks, sit at a cafe, or pretend to run errands that I didn't really need to. But I kept coming back to the same thoughts. Why did a simple gesture from my stepson shake me like this? Was I that desperate to feel cared for? Or had I been living in denial about how numb I'd become? At the same time, I started noticing things about him, things that didn't fit the picture of the quiet, polite young man I thought I knew. He would come home late, sometimes with a distant look in his eyes. There were phone calls he stepped outside to take, and messages he quickly closed when I walked into the room. A few times, I caught a glimpse of something darker in him. Not dangerous, but guarded. Like he was carrying a weight I didn't understand. Then one evening, I found something in the laundry. A letter, folded and worn, with my name on it. But it wasn't from my husband. And it wasn't just a note. It was something else entirely. The words inside made my heart race. It answered questions I didn't even know I was asking. But it also opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through. I didn't know what to believe anymore. And the worst part? I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. I stared at the letter for what felt like hours. My name, written in his handwriting, soft and unsure. The words inside weren't bold or dramatic, they were careful, almost afraid. He wrote about how he never expected to feel anything for me. He said it started with respect, then admiration, and somewhere along the way, it turned into something deeper. He talked about my sadness, the way I smiled through pain, and how he couldn't ignore it anymore. He never crossed a line, not physically, but emotionally, I could see he already had. And the worst part? So had I. I folded the letter and hid it at the back of my drawer. My heart was pounding, and for the first time, I was terrified. Not just of what might happen if someone found out, but of what this meant about me. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to need someone else to make me feel alive. But I did. And now, I couldn't unsee it, or undo it. The next few days were thick with silence. Every time I was in the same room as him, I felt the tension crackling in the air. We didn't speak about the letter. We barely spoke at all. But our eyes did. And I started to wonder, had my husband noticed anything at all? He wasn't saying much, but I could feel his eyes linger a little longer than usual. Was it suspicion? Or was it guilt? Because something told me I wasn't the only one keeping secrets. That's when I started digging. Not because I was trying to justify my own feelings, but because I had this gut feeling, something about my husband's sudden late nights, the way he kept his phone glued to him even in the shower. One night, after he fell asleep, I checked his messages. What I found wasn't what I expected. There was another woman. Younger. Messages going back months. Photos. Voice notes. Compliments he hadn't said to me in years. I couldn't breathe. My whole world tilted. The betrayal stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. I thought I was the one doing something wrong. But I was just alone. Forgotten. That discovery only made things more confusing. What now? Did I confront him? Did I run? And what about his son, this boy who had seen me, who had cared for me in a way no one else had? I was standing on a ledge, one step away from everything falling apart. And I still didn't know which direction to fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to my husband, watching him breathe steadily, like he had nothing in the world to hide. My mind kept replaying the messages I found on his phone, the sweet words, the promises, the laughter in her voice notes. He had been giving someone else the version of himself I hadn't seen in years. All this time, I was blaming myself for feeling disconnected, for letting someone else make me feel noticed, and yet he had already checked out of our marriage long before I even realized something was missing. I thought the betrayal would give me clarity. That it would help me figure out what to do next. But it only made everything more complicated. I couldn't look at his son the same way either. There was still that hidden letter in my drawer, and even though we never said a word about it, the energy between us had completely changed. There was distance now, but not the kind that makes you feel safe. It was the kind that felt charged, like something was waiting to break loose. The real twist came a few days later. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. My husband was upstairs, probably texting her, and I thought I was alone. But I turned around and saw his son standing in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He walked in slowly, holding something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe it was another note, something emotional, maybe even an apology. But when I opened it, everything I thought I knew cracked open. It wasn't written by him, it was from the other woman. Her name was at the bottom, signed in a flourish I'd seen in the photos on my husband's phone. But the letter wasn't to him. It was to his son. That's when everything hit me at once. The woman my husband had been seeing wasn't a stranger. She was someone his son had known first. And suddenly, all the pieces started to fit in the most horrifying way. The late-night phone calls, the distant look in his son's eyes, the tension I thought was about me, it wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was deeper. Messier. It was betrayal layered on top of betrayal, tangled between blood and vows. He looked at me, eyes full of pain, and said quietly, "I didn't know at first. She didn't tell me who she was seeing. But when I found out, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you." Everything inside me went cold. My husband wasn't just unfaithful. He had betrayed both of us. And now, his son, this young man who had been caught in the crossfire, was standing in my kitchen, holding the truth that neither of us could unhear or unsee. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I stood frozen, my heart pounding, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. I stood there gripping the letter, feeling like the floor beneath me had vanished. My husband hadn't just cheated, he'd done it with someone who had once been involved with his own son. The betrayal wasn't just mine to carry anymore. His son had been wounded just as deeply, maybe worse. I looked at him, this young man who had quietly held that pain, who had shown me kindness while carrying his own heartbreak. We were both victims of the same man's lies. That night, I didn't confront my husband. I needed time to think, to breathe. I stayed up in the living room with a blanket over my legs, staring at the fireplace even though it wasn't lit. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps. It was him, my husband. He stood there in the dim light, rubbing his eyes like nothing was wrong. I asked him where he had been. He muttered something about a late meeting. I didn't even bother calling him out. Instead, I asked a question he didn't expect. How long have you known she was with your son first? His eyes widened. Just for a second. And that second was enough. He didn't deny it. He sat down across from me and put his head in his hands. I didn't know at first, he said. But when I found out, I was already in too deep. I thought he was done with her. I thought it wouldn't matter. It always matters, I said. To him. To me. You destroyed more than just our marriage. He didn't say much after that. He didn't apologize. Not really. Just sat there in silence, letting the truth settle between us like dust after a collapse. And in that moment, I knew I was done. Done pretending. Done staying in a life that made me invisible. The next morning, I told him I was leaving. I packed only what I needed and walked out the door without looking back. His son helped me carry my bags to the car. There were no romantic words between us, no promises or confessions. Just a quiet understanding that our story was never meant to begin, at least, not like that. But just when I thought I had walked away from all of it, the final twist came a week later. I was staying at a friend's place, slowly putting myself back together. One afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was her, the woman from the letters. She looked nervous, almost ashamed. She handed me an envelope and said, "I think you deserve to know the full truth." Inside was a paternity test. Not for my husband. For his son. And just like that, everything I thought I had resolved came crashing back. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. I stared at the envelope in my hands, fingers trembling. The woman didn't say much, just that I should read it and decide for myself what to do next. Then she left, disappearing down the hallway like a shadow. I sat alone for a long time before I finally opened it. The paternity test confirmed it. The child she was carrying, it wasn't my husband's. It was his son's. Everything went still in that moment. All the confusion, the guilt, the heartbreak, it crashed into something deeper. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about a chain of lies and broken trust that stretched across generations. And now, a child was at the center of it all. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, letting the truth settle into the quiet. Later that evening, I called him, his son. He deserved to know. When I told him, there was silence on the other end. Then a shaky breath. "I always wondered," he said quietly. She never gave me a straight answer. I thought it was my dad's. I thought that's why she chose him over me. The pain in his voice was something I wouldn't forget. He was young, yes, but he had been hurt in ways that would leave scars for a long time. He thanked me for telling him, and we didn't speak again for several days. I didn't blame him. We both needed time to step away from the wreckage and figure out who we were without all the chaos. As for my husband, I left the test result on the dining table with a note that simply read, "You should know who you really betrayed." I never heard from him again. Not directly. A friend told me he moved out of the house and started over in another city. He never tried to reach out. Maybe guilt kept him silent. Or maybe it was shame. Either way, I was done waiting for closure from him. Over the next few months, I focused on myself. I started therapy, reconnected with friends, and slowly rebuilt a life I had lost somewhere along the way. I moved into a small apartment near the coast, nothing fancy, but it felt like mine. Every morning, I'd walk by the water and remind myself that healing isn't loud. It's slow. Quiet. Real. One afternoon, I got a message. It was him, his son. He was going to be a father. He wasn't sure how to feel about it yet, but he said he wanted to do things differently. He didn't want to repeat his father's mistakes. That one message, simple as it was, felt like the real ending to everything we'd been through. This story wasn't about a scandal. Not really. It was about being seen, being hurt, and finding the strength to let go. It was about love, but also about self-respect. And in the end, I didn't walk away with bitterness. I walked away with clarity. And sometimes, that's more than enough. 9.